Hello, everyone. Today is a dark and gloomy sort of day, the day that's great for curling up on the couch with a nice hot mug of tea and a good long book. So, today we're going to be talking about books. Very specifically, we're going to be talking about the books I read last year in 2022. Every year, I give myself a goal of reading at least one book a month, which probably doesn't seem like a lot, but when you have a very busy, exhausting sort of job, getting one book a month sometimes can feel like a big accomplishment. I actually made it through 13 books today, so I went above and beyond the goal by one, but hey, every little thing counts. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the books, just a little blurb on each one, just kind of giving my thoughts, maybe making some recommendations, recommending things to avoid. If you have any thoughts about any of the books I'm talking about today, please leave a comment. Let me know. I'd love to hear your own thoughts on it, even if you disagree with me. And if you have recommendations for me on other books to read, please include those as well, because I love books. I love reading. As much as I don't have enough time to read, I'm always interested in knowing what other people are reading and what they're enjoying or what they're not enjoying. I do hate reading bad books. So anyway, let's get to the point. Let's get to the books. This is in no particular order except for how I have them stacked in front of me. So let's get started. We're going to start with this behemoth, The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, which is a book that I have always wanted to read ever since I was a little girl. And I was really obsessed with anything medieval or fantasy or Middle Ages. Like, I loved the Ren Fair. I grew up on games like King's Quest and Quest for Glory, and I was really interested in the Arthurian legends. There was also a miniseries coming out at the time when I was growing up that got a lot of traction. I never got into it, though. It was just something that kept falling through the tracks, but I finally picked it up. I finally read it. Pretty good. Not great. I do really like the more feminist reading of the Arthurian characters, especially, it focuses a lot on the feminine, the women characters in the book, their influence, and less on Arthur and the knights. I really appreciated that aspect of it. At the time, I'm sure it was really groundbreaking. Since then, we've had a lot more stories like that inspired by it. So by the time I got around to it, it didn't seem as formative as it could have been, but I still really enjoyed it. So it's a long one, though, so make sure you make a lot of time for that. I think I started with this book in the year, which may have kind of made it difficult to make it through more books because it's hefty. Moving on, we've got Redwall, another series that I've always wanted to read but never had a chance to get to until now, which I think is a shame because this is such a charming book and I would have absolutely gone crazy for this series as a kid. I'm trying to read it through it now to make up for lost time, and it's adorable. It's about mice defending their little church stronghold in the forest, and the characters are charming. A couple parts didn't age quite as well, like with the sparrows. That kind of made me a bit uncomfortable, but it's adorable. I love it. I'm so mad that I actually had a crack ship between two characters, one of whom died surprisingly early in the book. The deaths are actually really great because you feel like it's kind of a kid's fairy tale, but it's very rooted and realistic. The action scenes and the gore is actually kind of impressive for what you'd expect from a kid's book. And I just really enjoyed it, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about Redwall. Next on the list, Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. And this book was such a joy to read. It is the story of a young Japanese woman who's kind of pushing into middle age, and the character is very clearly different, and I really appreciated that. As somebody who also works in the service industry, it got so many things so perfectly right about what it's like to be neurodivergent in a society that expects certain things from you. And the main character is just Kiko. She's just has such a different view of things, and it really resonated with me a lot because the things she does is a lot of the things I do with compartmentalizing and just like reading the script, and that's how you're able to you just kind of check out and you just go through the job, and it's about being comfortable with yourself when society expects something different from you. And very good read, very quick read. It's not a long book at all, but I really liked this one. Highly recommended. Next, we have My Best Friend's Exorcism. I actually just finished this book as it was being announced that they made a movie, that they were making a movie about it. I still haven't seen the movie. I haven't heard great things, so I'm a little nervous to see it because I did really enjoy the book. The book it's such a great like little time capsule of the 80s, but in a way that wasn't so over the top that it just felt kitschy, or that it was just trying to tap into the nostalgia. You know, I was born in the 80s, so I don't really have a lot of memories of the 80s. I'm more of a 90s kid, but it's still like you appreciate, you know, where you came from essentially. And Grady Hendrix has a great grasp on relationships of high school teenage girls. Like, I felt like the characters in this book were me and my friends in high school. Even though the era was slightly different, there's just like some things that are universal, and he tapped into that very well, and it was very impressive. All the chapter titles are songs from the 80s, so expect to be earwormed every time you read it, and there's some real bangers in there. This book also had one of my probably favorite characters I've read about in this year, with Christian Lemon, who is a bodybuilder bro for Christ, essentially, that does like school performances and mall performances, and who the main character taps to help her out with an exorcism of her best friend, thus the title. And it's just such a great character, and I loved him. I loved reading about him, and I still think about him even though I read this toward the beginning of the year. Very highly recommended. Eventually I'll check out the movie, but I like this one a lot. Going back on my classics train, I read Robert Heinlein's The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which, having written a few penal colonies in space stories, including I recently had published in Bards and Sages Quarterly a story called The Mutinies of Starvation, which, you know, kind of vibes on that whole other planet penal colony, like basically a celestial version of Australia. Let's jump all our criminals in there. And that's kind of what started the society in The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. It was okay. You know, it was very, you know, at this point, it's an older book, and so a lot of things have tapped from it. So a lot of the things seemed very familiar, you know. There was some very awkward misogyny. There's actually a character who goes around in blackface in it, which is very awkward, but it's a sign of the times. It's an older book. I did really like the way the society was developed, and that I felt was the most interesting parts of the book. I didn't quite care for the action, or the climax of the book was really boring to me. I didn't really care. I just wanted to know more about the society, especially since there's a really intricate polyamorous family structure that the main character is involved in, that I just thought was really interesting world building. So very good world building, not so great on plot. Didn't really age very well in some aspects. Next, I've got Mercedes Lackey's collection of short stories called Fiddler Fair. When I was first starting out with writing, a lot of people compared my writing to Mercedes Lackey, although I haven't really read a lot of her stuff, so I'm always looking for an opportunity to read more of her things. And I remember almost absolutely nothing about this book. So obviously it left a great impact on me. I should read it again. I know there's a couple stories I marked as ones I enjoyed. But honestly, I can't tell you much about this book at all. It just... Moving on. Marriage of a Thousand Lies by S.J. Sindhu. Sorry. This book I really enjoyed. It is the story of an Indian American woman who is a lesbian, and she's married to an Indian American man who is gay. And so they basically just got married to satisfy their parents and their culture. And the story is mostly about her navigating through that life and that marriage of a thousand lies. And it's just really interesting to have a perspective of an Indian American LGBTQ character. and just their experiences, their difficulties. The half their family knows and is just trying not to say anything. The others just are really insistent that she just keeps up this lie, and her best friend who she's in love with is getting married, and so there's a whole bunch of complicated stuff there. And yeah, really good book, very highly recommended. I love reading books that are from the perspective of someone who is so far removed from my own experience, because I think that just makes the world a little bit richer to understand those experiences. Next, I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. And I kind of had this a little bit spoiled for me, and usually I'm okay with spoilers, but with this book, it's written in such a way that knowing from the onset what the twist at the end is kind of colors your perspective on it. And I wonder if that played into why I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. The writing is very fantastic. I loved the writing, but the actual story and the pacing and things like that, I couldn't really get into. I'm going to be honest. I know they made a Netflix movie on it, and I have heard good things about that. I have actually watched a video talking about it that kind of put the book into perspective for me a little bit better. That made me want to go back and read the book. So eventually I'm going to watch the movie, read the book, because I really like the ideas and the things behind it. But on my first reading, it just didn't do it for me. So we'll see. We'll see what a second reading brings for that one. I also read Salt, A World History by Mark Kurlansky. I try to sprinkle in a couple nonfiction too. I'm mostly big on fiction, but I do love a good nonfiction book. This came out as an interesting time, though, because as I was reading this, I had also started playing Triangle Strategy for the Nintendo Switch, which, if you know anything about that game, it's about a big war that revolves around salt. Salt is extremely important in this world, and it has been very important in our world and shaping a lot of different things. And this book definitely catalogs that, and it really helped make the plot of Triangle Strategy seem more effective, I guess. Because I was reading about how salt has changed the world, and I was playing about how salt changed the world, so they worked very well in synergy with each other. The only problem with this book is that it did get a little repetitive and boring, because yes, it covers a lot of different time periods, the importance of salt, but for the most part, the importance of salt was kind of the same. The way they harvested the salt was kind of the same. The way they traded the salt was kind of the same, which is little different flavors based on time period and geographical area. Still very interesting, and it is really cool to think about how something as basic as salt is that important to the world, but not a bad read. Next one I have is Provenance by Ann Leckie, which is the only book on the list that I have read before. I reread it to kind of refresh myself for a little plot on a role-playing game that I play, where I play a character from Ann Leckie's Imperial Ratch series. This book is loosely connected to that. It takes place in the same world. There's some references to the events in the trilogy, but it focuses on a little bit of a different story and different planet that's far removed from some of the stuff that's happening there. Very interesting characters. Leckie is fantastic at world building. I will read anything she writes and just be in awe of her world building. And Ingray, the main character, is very unique. She's very flawed. I do feel like there was a little bit of a romance shoehorned in there that I could have probably done without. I really loved the interactions between the other characters, though, and there's a sibling rivalry going on. Some political intrigue, and basically the story focuses on the importance of providence, of artifacts, of things, of our memory, and the genuine nature of these things. What's more important, the actual item or what the item symbolizes? And it's just really interesting, really thought-provoking. Very highly recommended any of Ann Leckie's stuff. Back to another nonfiction. I've read Skeletons on the Sahara, a true story of survival by Dean King, which is which ended up being really interesting. It's basically about this ship that was shipwrecked in Africa and on the shores of the Sahara, and in the 1800s, and basically what the crew went through based on journals that were found and other accounts, and just how rough and horrible their experience was, essentially, because they were taken in by nomadic tribes, they were enslaved, and just their quest to kind of get back to their world and not, and actually survive, which not a lot of them did. A lot of them came very close to not surviving. And it was just very interesting to get that perspective of a different era of the world. And I feel like we don't really hear that much about this. So I liked it. I liked it a lot. I'm starting to ramble, but there's only 3 books left. So hang with me. My next one is Terry Pratchett's Dodger, which I am a huge Terry Pratchett fan. I love Discworld. This book is not one of his few non-Discworld books, which unfortunately did work against it, because a lot of the times when I was reading it, I wanted it to be Discworld, but it wasn't Discworld. It's actually historical fiction that takes place in Dickensian London, to the point where Dickens is actually a character in the story, and it's the story of Dodger, who is a street urchin type. I think what Pratchett was going for is that the character of the Artful Dodger in Oliver Twist is based on this Dodger character in this book, and his exploits in trying to save a princess, from a bad situation. And it's really great. There's a lot of cameos from famous 18th century Victorian figures, and it's just a fun romp. I did wish it was a little more Discworldy. It was a little more rooted in reality, but all of Pratchett's usual wit and cleverness is all in here. So I enjoyed it. I feel like Discworld better. And even though I said that I didn't do this intentionally, I just kind of stacked my books and I went randomly. The last 2 books are actually 2 of my favorite books. So that's kind of exciting. I'm going to start with this one. It's East by Edith Patel. This one was actually recommended to me by a very good friend of mine who bought it for me for Christmas or my birthday or something. She said it was one of her favorite books growing up, and I read it and I absolutely adored it, to the point where I bought it for my sister-in-law. So we're passing it around. But East is the story of a young woman named Rose who goes on this really grand adventure in search of this polar bear, a man who has been turned into a polar bear. It reminded me very much of a different retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I found out later that it's actually an Icelandic story that she was inspired by. It has very Beauty and the Beast elements, because she agrees to go with this bear to this castle, and he's under a curse, so he has to try to kind of get her to care for him for a certain amount of time, because there's a troll who put a curse on him that's in love with him. And then they start to develop a love for each other, and then she messes it up at the end, and then she has to go find him after he's been kidnapped by the troll queen who's in love with him, and rescue him from the troll queen. So it's a little bit of a reversal. Very sweeping, very exciting. I really enjoyed it. There's a sequel to it that I'm going to be starting soon, that I'm excited to get to, and highly recommended. Like I said, I bought it for my sister-in-law too, so this one's a good one. And last but not least is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones, which is probably my favorite out of the whole lot of books that I read. I still think about it. It's one of the first books I read. This was given to me by my brother and sister-in-law. And it's spooky, it's dark. I'd love to see this as a movie someday, because it's just visually, you can visualize everything. It's the story of, it's been a while since I read it, but I'm pretty sure it's 4 Native American friends who, on an ill-fated hunting trip, killed a deer, and that deer's fawn is actually looking for revenge on them. and it's very good. It's very creepy. I still think about some of the scenes from it today. So yeah, highly recommended. This is a great book to finish up on. And we did it. We went through all the books in one take. Amazing. I'm sorry if it was really rambling. Thank you for sticking through to the end if you did. Please leave recommendations for me in the comments or your own thoughts on these books. And yeah, I hope to talk about more books. Maybe not so many books all at once again, because that was a slog. I'm not going to lie. But we did it. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.